we are back. Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We come to you here on Wednesdays from 11 to 11:50. And every week we share with you a new guest from in and around Indianapolis, folks who are doing good based on our tagline from Titus 3, 1, 8, and 14. Do good, do good, do good. So that's the focus of our radio show. We crossed 3 bridges at Comenius. You can see the stand up behind me. That's who sponsors our show. Comenius Institute crosses 3 bridges. The first is into college. And what we do at college is actually engage Christian young people, helping them to think Christianly about their disciplines, their subject areas, the classes they're invested in. And also, I teach there with a great group of faculty on the campus, but would be happy to talk with you about the kinds of things that are going on the campus of IUPUI. In fact, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, that tomorrow night, we will be hearing from Nancy Fitzgerald, who is a renowned golf player, but who basically has given up a lot in that particular venue of life so as to pursue an apologetics ministry. So you'll be hearing about that. Students will at IUPUI tomorrow night at 7 o'clock on the campus, on the first floor of the campus center. And then the second bridge we cross is into community, which is what we're doing right now. And we invite folks from around Indianapolis, Christians who are doing good, and tell us about the kind of good work that they're doing. Then the third bridge that we cross is into culture. And this comes in lots of different ways. We do Truth in 2 that comes out, a video that comes out every Tuesday morning. We're always grateful for the opportunity to invest in all kinds of different cultural venues. This month, of course, Black History Month. Just yesterday, we put out a piece on Michelle Obama and her response to folks getting upset with Ellen DeGeneres and George W. Bush actually talking with each other. Imagine that. So you can check those kinds of things out at warpandwoof.org. That's warpandwoof.org. Or go to comeniusinstitute.org or .com. But today, we have the great privilege to have Commish Nunley here with us from Commish Speaks, among many other different titles that we were even talking about this morning. Commish, thanks for being here on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing me back. I really appreciate it.
It's really nice to see friendly faces again. And I know that your work is expanding, but let's start with bio first. Tell us something about your life and introduce yourself to folks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Commish Nunley. I am a licensed mental health counselor, as well as a certified trauma specialist. Majority of my work revolves around providing psychotherapy services and training services to different local community organizations in the areas of mental health. And so what I specialize in with the area of trauma is providing trauma-informed care for individuals, couples, families, or anything under that umbrella. Currently, we've taken on a new venture with our mental health ministry, where we take our services into the church at a very affordable rate to offer high-end services to clients that would otherwise be unable to afford those types of services. So that's what we're currently doing at the moment. We also have a spin-off of sorts where we've just delved into working with pastors who undergo insurmountable levels of stress. And as a result of stress, sometimes anxiety and depression. And so we've built in a feature that also catches them in order to prevent things like burnout or even suicidality in more extreme situations. So that's who I am. That's what I do.
So you got to give a little love to the man. Tell us about your husband.
My husband, my amazing rock.
See, that's why I wanted her to say something.
He is just above all. I call him Bae, beyond anything else. He is a principal at Grind Creek Middle School, and it is something that he is very passionate about in terms of changing the lives of children. So he gets them when they're young. Yep. I get them when they're old.
There you go. That's good. And what church do you attend?
Light of the World Christian Church occasionally. I also am a member of ANWA in Chicago, and I live stream with Dr. Matthew Stevenson.
Okay, very good. So very powerful ministry here that you have in Indianapolis, and we wanted to focus specifically today on pastoral burnout because it is really a transitional element for you in the direction that you may be going. in the future, but that doesn't mean that you're taking yourself away from other things.
Right.
Let's start with maybe the most obvious question that everybody might have, which is why do people get burned out?
Why do people get burned out? There's a lot of different reasons why people end up burned out, especially if they take on careers that involve serving or helping others.
Mm-hmm.
As you probably know, in working with others and helping others, there oftentimes get created this emotional deficit where we start doing more for other people than we allow ourselves to do for ourselves. And so as a result of that and many other components, which could be a predisposition issue, it could also be, whatever is going on in the world, like disasters, things like that.
Coronavirus.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. I just find that name so funny. Why coronavirus?
I don't. It's okay. It's okay.
And so anything that is going on in and around the individual who is in that servicing field is susceptible to burnout, as well as anything that is going on within the household. Like if you're taking care of a family member, that can make you more susceptible to burnout. And oftentimes people, such as nurses or in-home aides, experience burnout as well. So it's something that in the health professions, it's very known about. However, the proverbial loop, pastors kind of slip through the loop of that in terms of having like a way to catch them if they should hit, some of these markers that indicate some level of burnout.
So would you say that, and I don't know, I'm just asking, would you say that most pastors are men?
That's a very unique question. I think that most visible pastors are men.
Okay. So let's stay with that issue of the people that are most visible. I think just generally speaking in the culture may be men. That's not to give short shrift to anyone out there who's listening who may be pastoral engaged from a woman's point of view. But what is it about men that we have a tendency to not want to seek help?
Absolutely. That's a multifaceted question, actually.
We only have 40 minutes.
It's difficult, that men grow up with the teachings oftentimes, or even as young boys, that it is not okay to have emotional reactions. It is not okay to cry. It is not okay to have too much anger. It's not okay. And so otherwise there's like points taken away from them if they slip into that. So they're forced into developing this hard exterior and approach to life. And then as they grow up, there's this level of emotional arrestedness or stuntedness that prevents them from even being able to give language to what they're experiencing, let alone go and talk with someone about it. And then you add in the whole machismo factor.
Oh my.
Because men, divinely so, are in charge of protecting, providing, and giving identity. So to have to surrender under someone and not serve in those three roles is very difficult for the ego, so to speak, to grasp a hold of and feel like it would be safe.
Okay. So the whole male issue is one that is a whole discussion point and would take a long time to kind of unpack.
Yes.
Maybe this is a good time to take, as it were, a commercial break for you and tell people about the kinds of services that you offer. I know that you kind of gave an overview generally at the beginning of our show, but tell folks about the services that you offer, considering what you just said about, what I just said about unpacking all of this takes a while.
So the services that we currently offer, especially for different churches, is that we bring our services into your church and offer, counseling on all modalities, individual, family, couples, group psychotherapy, all of that, as well as we have just ventured into offering services specifically for leadership or clergy members in the church and pastors, where we have opened up an area that is safe, non-judgmental, and also confidential. Everyone is required to sign a confidentiality clause. where pastors can come and just let their hair down and talk about the challenges of ministry work.
Mm-hmm.
They can talk about, the difficulty of navigating personal life issues, as well as maintaining, the projected perfectionism that gets thrown onto them sometimes by congregants.
Mm-hmm.
They can talk through those issues safely and get feedback either from other pastors in the room, but also clinical feedback from myself on how to deal with the level of burden that they feel that they are up under. And so that support group runs for about 8 weeks. And then at the end of that 8 weeks, it's a prerequisite, I can never say that word, prerequisite, to getting into the course, which is a self-paced course and lasts anywhere from 12 weeks to 8 months. And what we hope that course will do is allow you to become an advocate of mental health and be able to reach back to other pastors who are struggling as well, provide your own support groups, things like that, and just gives you more confidence to speak up and be transparent about your struggle with everything. Because as you know, Jesus revealed his scars, and as a result, other people revealed theirs. And I think we have to start from the top in order for others to feel safe in reaching out as well. So that course is 12 weeks to 6 months, hopefully to one day be certified. And then they become a member, First Shepherd's member, where, we're going to be doing conferences, things like that.
Okay. So, and just to put a period on this, your website is?
Our website is healinghiddenhurtsministries.org. If you cannot locate it, you can also reach out to healingyourhiddenhurts.com.
Or Commission on.
Or Commission on.
And you're also known on Facebook as Commish Speaks.
Commish Speaks, yes.
Yeah, so there's all of that.
Yes, there is all that. So I also take on speaking engagements. This weekend I will be presenting at Second Chance Church, where I'll be talking about creating an emotionally healthy leader. Because oftentimes when we go into leadership, we look at the physical demands, we look at the personality demands, but we don't consider the emotional demands of leadership, and it's not oftentimes included in the dialogue. And so what I've done is I go to different churches and I talk about how to infuse that in the work so that we can prevent things like burnout.
Okay.
So is that added?
Okay. So what got you into all of this? I mean, this has had to have had some kind of spark, some initiative. What was it that got you going?
Absolutely. So it was basically the statistic that I started to realize where 30% of pastors are leaving ministry work. 1 in 3 pastors experience burnout and also thoughts of suicide. And until recently, within the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen a spiraling of that with a lot of different pastors in the media having committed suicide because of the burdens that they've been under and just feeling isolated and alone. So being that I specialize in this area, I wanted to offer something where we could try to catch that before it hits that level, and so that we're no longer losing, good pastors, good pastoring, because we don't have language for or ways to deal with the difficulties.
Was there an incident, that you saw personally, or is this just a general, I've seen a lot of this, so I needed to do something about it kind of thing?
It's so interesting. I think when God gives you a cause for pause, you take it. And my cause for pause was realizing the influx of how many pastors were just coming in on my caseload just for themselves. And I prayed and prayed and prayed and did research. And it was at that point that I realized that there is a need in this area. I think I've been in this field doing this work for 20 years. And I know I don't look that old, or 15 years, but 20 considering school. And I see clients in waves. So one year it'll be all about financial strain. Another year it'll be all about depression. So clients come in waves, and I don't believe coincidence, right? Okay. So when I started to notice how many pastors were placing themselves on my schedule, I was like, okay, there's obviously some level of deficit here. Let me learn about this. And we had already ventured into the mental health ministry portion of things. And so I just felt like God was revealing more that, needed to be done.
Yeah.
And this was the more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, certainly the wave issue is something that we're going to continue to see no matter what, just because of human sin. The problem, of course, living in a fallen world where whatever may happen is going to happen. We can't always be prepared for that. The providences of God and so on. So what do you see as the trend that's causing burnout? How would you address that?
So some of the common trends that I most often notice is that our pastors and leaders, when they get so busy doing for Christ instead of being with Christ, they forget to prioritize time with Christ and allow themselves to get fed. And so one of the biggest challenges for some of the pastors that I've worked with is prioritizing Sabbath rest.
Sabbath rest.
Yeah.
Keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
Taking moments where 2 or 3 days or even a week, you're not bogged down by ministry work. You're not overly, thinking what programs you need to put in place for productivity of sorts, right? But you can just be human and be a congregant yourself, a parishioner yourself, a sheep of sorts. So that's one of the heaviest trends that I've noticed is that our pastors, our leaders really struggle with managing that Sabbath rest, which we all know is very much needed. Another one is that they start to, because of the projections that are thrown onto them oftentimes, start to develop unrealistic expectations of themselves. And so this is the pastor who puts on 50 different hats, serves in every different role, has to do everything themselves in terms of doing repasses or funerals, holding weddings or meeting someone who's chronically ill at the hospital, and there's no delegation of duty, like they're doing it themselves, and they take on this I hate to say Superman quality of just being able to save the world.
Right.
But as we all know, if you don't secure your mask first, which means having healthy expectations of self, and not allowing those expectations to determine your worth as well, not tying your ego to outcome, basically, then that can help you prevent from experiencing burnout. But it's those unrealistic expectations, thinking that you can do it all. And a lot of us are gifted with the ability to multitask. However, we have to embrace our God-given limits as well. God's been setting limits since the beginning of time, since he made dark and light, so we have to embrace limits that we've been blessed with. And a lot of times we see limitation as a weakness.
Oh, yeah.
But no, we have limits because we are human.
Right.
Yeah.
The problem, of course, is that we basically thumb our nose at the creational mandate given in Genesis 2:1-3 of this Shabbat, the Sabbath, that's literally embedded within creation, seasonal or day-night or anything like this. Even this concept of mitosis, feel free to use this biological example.
Please.
So when
I'm taking it all in.
Yeah. So when
the
when cells split, before they split, it's called mitosis, the splitting of cells. The cells literally stop and rest before they split again. I only know that because I talk to biologists, not because that's my field by any means. But the concept of this Shabbat being literally embedded within the creation of God is huge and important, and we ignore it to our peril, and that's why you're here, and that's why we're talking about this today.
Absolutely, and that just brings me to another trend, is that when we fail to steward appropriately trauma exposure. So as pastors, as leaders, we're exposed to a heavy amount of traumatic stories. And if we don't steward that effectively, then we a lot of times can become burned out or even experience what we call vicarious trauma or secondary traumatization, where the now you got to say it wrong, parasympathetic and the sympathetic systems fail to flow naturally, right?
Yeah.
And so it creates some level of upheaval or hyperarousal in us where it's never really given any room to calm, and you're never given any room to self-soothe. And so you're in hyperdrive a lot of the time, which you can only go, and anybody knows that it is not something that is sustainable. You know, we have to be willing to slow down. We have to be willing to use your word. My say it again.
Oh, mitosis.
Mitosis.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to embrace.
Yeah, the rest before the sun splits. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, speaking of slowing down, we have to take a break.
Okay.
But we're not going to take a break because we're having some technical difficulties. So we're just actually going to go straight through, and then folks that are with us there, thanks for being with us. I see all these green lines over on both screens. HP's got Facebook Live up, so that's really great. Thanks all for being with us, and feel free to shoot us a question if you have one. Feel free to do that. But we'll just continue. Go ahead.
Can I mention one more?
Please.
Another trend that I'm noticing is that when we take on all these different responsibilities, we have a propensity where numbing becomes very seductive to us.
Oh.
Numbing emotions.
Yeah.
Numbing ourselves to situations. It's something that I experienced early on in my career when I worked with level 4 or 5 offenders at Newcastle Correctional Facility or Wabash Correctional Facility. Where I would hear horrific stories. And my job, in essence, was to give hope to people who had 60 and 120 years behind bars, right? You sell hope to someone and so that led me on a path to burning out because I became highly desensitized to those stories. And that desensitization didn't leave room to feel the emotion, to feel the connecting feelings. And so I would start to numb.
So I have to ask this question because as soon as you mention this, I'm thinking to myself, so I am addicted to the legal white powder, which is sugar.
Oh,
so
I was like, wait, don't go in that direction.
I know.
Maybe
HB is over there holding his heart. Yeah, he's saying, what is going on in 4 years? Yeah, so yes, so the addiction is real.
Yes.
And I say it that way just to get people's
and I'm a recovering
response.
addict as well.
Yes, there you go. See, so those of us who appreciate the issue of sugar also get into the whole issue of comfort food. So I'm asking the question as it relates to you're saying we numb ourselves. So when we talk about comfort food, is that a number?
It is a number. It is a number. Pain is very unique. It seeks out comfort in just about anything. And so when we're in painful situations, we'll do whatever it takes to feel like we can self-regulate and return ourselves to homeostasis, right? So we do the food, we do spending habits, we do gambling. Some of us delve into sexual pornography, substance abuse. So it really is how we follow the line of pain in our lives and where it leads us. But yes, eating is definitely a way to numb yourself from the brunt of the pain.
Yeah, just because it's something different, something else, something that takes our mind off it because it tastes good.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot to be said for taste buds, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And sugar is an addictive substance.
Yeah.
I mean, recent studies have uncovered how it's even more so addictive than that of cocaine. So I know sometimes I used to run a substance abuse or chemical dependency group, and they would laugh at me when I would compare my addiction to their addictions.
Right.
And they would say, how dare you come in here and talk about your addiction to M&Ms? I'm like, well, it seems like it's haphazard and it doesn't relate until you consider the level of disease that runs in my family, which revolves around diabetes, cancer, and all of that. So while yours may be a quicker road to death, right, mine is nonetheless more harmful. I mean, even as harmful.
Even as, yeah, absolutely,
right? It's just slower.
Yeah.
So absolutely, sugar is a way to numb. And I'm sure if you had a neuroscientist or someone who was in biology, they could talk to you about the effects of sugar and how it gives us that quick elevation, but then it, takes us down. And so if we're already pre-exposed to having depression, it just recycles those depressive episodes.
It fascinates me. This is maybe tangential, but maybe even something to bring up in the future as you talk about it, issues of addiction and how it actually impacts us in this whole discussion that we're having here about burnout, that it is true in an economic, political sense that in the 1960s, the sugar industry actually got ahead of this by suggesting that the real problem was fat in food.
You must have been watching What the Health. It's a documentary that I recently watched that had that information.
It was a book, but same information, But that's very important to recognize, and that really kind of brings us to this point where we say we need to recognize that sometimes the problems that we face, yes, we have bare personal responsibility. By the way, I'm looking at the camera here and saying, we're not suggesting that anybody doesn't bear personal responsibility. That's not at all the point. But when you become part of a cultural phenomenon, let's say, for instance, of the sugar industry, in this case, there is a continual carryover into personal lives. And so, we bear responsibility, but at the same time, we're recognizing that there are other powers at stake here at play. So let's talk about what that might mean in terms of symptoms. We've been talking about the burnout issue and how this impacts pastors, and we could pretty much identify any group. But what do you see as symptoms of this?
The symptoms so we can refer to it as vicarious trauma, burnout, secondary trauma, but it's all revolving around the same concept where we tend to accumulate trauma over time. Matsu Khan came out with a theory on cumulative trauma, where he talks about subtle traumas over time, if undealt with or unhealed, surmount to one big trauma. And therein you have compassion fatigue, vicarious traumatization, secondary traumatization. But the symptoms basically look the same. And so in my book, I dubbed the term, well, I didn't dub it, but I used the term leadership pain to describe what the symptoms look like. And so the primary symptom itself is recognizing that you don't do leadership the same as you previously did. And in fact, you're much more apprehensive in your approach to leadership, where you have difficulty trusting other people. You have a healthy amount of cognitive dissonance, which leads to a lot of guilt and shame.
Tell folks what cognitive dissonance is.
So cognitive dissonance is like a dialectic. It's where you hold two opposing viewpoints. And you grab a hold to one that may be maladaptive because it's comfortable and familiar. And instead of changing over to the more healthier version, you stick with what's comfortable and familiar. And so it's where you've been doing things one way and you're privy to new information, but you won't take that new information on, and instead you continue to do the way that you've been doing things.
Because it's easier.
It's because it's easier, because it's conditioned, because we don't have resource. There's a lot of reasons. However, you continue along that pattern long enough, you build up cycles of guilt, shame, and blame. And guilt and shame are two of the most powerful emotions that you could ever feel, right? They are the substratum of a multitude of dis-ease and disorder. And so if you subject your brain to guilt and shame on a regular basis through cognitive dissonance or anything else, there is a stronger likelihood that you will develop a mental health disorder. Depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, more chronic or even pervasive personality deficits over time. So some of the other, did that explain it well enough?
Oh, absolutely,
okay. Some of the other symptoms are deeply seated emotional wounds that you bring to the table prior to, like mother and father wounds, or having what in the spiritual world are called orphan spirits or slavery mindsets, and a constant need for validation and difficulty in social and family relationships. So that's how I coin it in my book. However, the cycle of exposure, which was created by, I cannot remember her name just because it's a unique name, but I know the book. It's called Stewarding Trauma, or Trauma Stewardship, I believe. But she had created a cycle of symptoms that you notice when you're up under trauma or experiencing some level of burnout. And so just to go through that list really quickly, is that okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Where you experience a level of helplessness, hopelessness, or you become hyper vigilant, so hyper aware of your surroundings. You experience a diminished level of creativity and just feel kind of stuck in moving forward. An inability to embrace complexity just because your mind is unable to process cognitions well, and so you're more sensory motor oriented, which is kind of returning to those early years in life where, you know, touch, taste, see, feel was how you describe the world.
Right.
Minimizing of your circumstances and their impacts on you. Chronic exhaustion, so your soul, your spirit, your body is just tired and you are through. And then deliberate avoidance, where that's where, you know, people don't want to feel the feelings. So they over medicate or they delve into those comforts.
Or they just traverse and go right over the problem.
Yes.
Because they don't want to deal with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Dissociative moments where you kind of detach from self. And it's almost like you're watching yourself on a movie screen, right? Or you're having a lot of flashbacks that are coming into present day in the form of intrusive thoughts and memories. A sense of persecution, feeling like everyone's kind of out to get you. And so as a result, you respond with irritability. Anger to the point where you project your issues onto other people instead of dealing with them internally. And then a level of cynicism that comes along with that. That's always fun. Guilt and fear, numbing, we talked about, addictions, and grandiosity, where our identity is tied to outcome. Okay. Does that make sense? And then last, dogma and self-righteousness.
So, I mean, literally, those last two. Read those last two again real quick.
Dogma and self-righteousness.
Yeah, but the one before it as well.
Grandiosity, and where your identity is tied to the outcome.
Yeah, so those things right there, I mean, those speak to so many leaders. So, you know, the idea that somehow if I don't produce results, if I don't have numbers, if I don't have quantitative analysis, then, you know, in some way I'm a failure, or I lose my job, or, you know, people think less of me, or you know, let's be honest, we live in a quantitative world. We do not, even though we live in a world of stories, which ought to take precedence, quite frankly. And this is what I'm always telling my students: they need to tell stories. This is really powerful and important. So it's
relate to stories.
Yeah, everybody does. 40% of the Bible is story. So there's a reason why, you know, we should tie into this, which then leads me to say about 40% of the Bible is also poetry. So, you know, there's the reason for rap, you know, if nothing else. Those kinds of things are important to acknowledge. And let me just give you an example of this. So, and see if I'm not tracking with you, and see if everybody else will track with you in this way. So I tell people I grew up in a AAA household. My father was an adulterous, abusive alcoholic. So because of that, one of the things that I deal with is avoidance. So that's why I kind of immediately, you know, my eyes went wide when you said that, because if I can in any way avoid conflict, oh my, I am stepping off and away. So I see that in myself. What are, you know, you went through some of the symptoms. Okay, so now you can talk to me or talk to anybody about whatever problem they may be facing in this sense of things. Okay, how are we going to reconcile this? How could we reduce it? How could we not avoid it, but take it on and say, I've got this problem and therefore I need to move in this direction?
One of the most important ways, if you notice some of these becoming a part of your daily way of approaching life, or even in your interactions with others, is to prioritize self-care. And that's where I run into some pushback, just because, I don't know, somewhere along the continuum, people started to believe that self-care was selfish. And as you and I know, self-care is absolutely necessary if we want to be able to help others.
Yeah.
And God does call on us to love our neighbor as ourselves, which requires us to love ourselves. So there has to be a degree of self-love in there. I'm sure you've heard this many times over. But we live by that philosophy in the work that I do, and helping people understand the difference between selfishness and self-care.
So let's pause and say, one of the things that is true about life is that, and specifically Christianity, is it's an other-centered religion. The problem, of course, is not that we don't have enough love of self. We already love ourselves.
Yes.
So, Paul says this in Ephesians chapter 5. But the problem is that we don't, it seems, take the time or to identify or intentionalize that Sabbath rest.
Yeah.
That, and maybe if we could, make it for church folk in this way, we could say, maybe if you're having trouble with the phrase self-care, you can just talk about it as Sabbath rest. Even the Son of God needed a way to get away to pray and away from people.
Let me get away.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And honestly, not a lot of people practice self-care because they don't self-love.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that they don't see their inherent worth. They don't see all those things that we see in them.
Right.
We recognize their gifts, we give them accolades, but sometimes it just kind of goes to this perceived version of humility, which ends up becoming very false in the realm of things. So not all of us have that ability to have self-love or love ourselves. And some of us love ourselves, but in a very unhealthy, prideful way, where we boast in our accolades or we boast in our accomplishments instead of understanding that our work requires us to boast more so in our weaknesses.
So there is maybe the defense mechanism.
Absolutely.
So for me, it might be avoidance. For somebody else, it might be puffing themselves up.
Puff up. For others, it's, again, going back to that, attaching your self-worth to what you do, insofar as that becomes your identity, which is very unhealthy, because if you externalize your identity and it's not coming from it within, then it's going to change and sway with the wind. If your identity is tied to the applause, when the applause goes away, what happens to your identity?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So in that sense of things, let's move to maybe what should be the most obvious issue, and that is the need for community.
The need for community. I mean, we're social creatures. God created us to be social creatures. And to me, it's one of the reasons why there is the church. And you probably know the biblical basis of that. But when we, the fabric of our being is love and belonging. And when we don't feel like we belong, but instead we're trying to fit in, it creates crevices of dysfunction in us, where we start to take on this idea of not being worthy of, or having to be a chameleon, or not, almost like self-hatred. So yeah, we have to be very careful to, navigate that very carefully, insofar as understanding first we need to start with healthy identity.
So from a Hebraic Christian point of view, the biblical base would be, we start with the fact that everybody's made in God's image.
Yes.
And then we move from there to recognize that God has given us task in this life in Genesis 2, 5, 7, and 15, that you even mentioned this earlier, that men and women are given the responsibility to provide from and protect that which has been given to us. And we've all been given a stewardship of something. So even in this radio show, HB's been given the stewardship of Radio Next for 8+ years now. And so that's his baby. But we all bear the responsibility of stewardship in some way or another. But now to this point, the relational point is from God's creation of men and women. So he made us to be relational. And that's a huge issue.
I mean, if you look at the Bible for its context, it's all about reconciliation to God, reconciliation to self, and reconciliation to others. I mean, you walk through every book in the Bible just about, and it's talking about relationship in some facet and being able to reconcile too. Does that make sense?
Oh,
so it plays a huge role.
Sounds like you're writing a book or something.
Yes, I am writing a book.
Tell people what the title is, by the way.
So it's called Self-Care as an Extension of Ministry, based upon the work that I've done over the last 5 years in the church and some things that we've uncovered, and giving pastors and leadership a guide of sorts of when they start to feel this way, and what are some practical strategies that I can use, and what are some realistic ways where I can embrace health and transparency, emotional health and transparency, so that I can grow myself while ministry grows. Right.
One of the things that strikes me as we're having this conversation over all of these moments is the need for Christians to think in interdisciplinary ways.
Absolutely.
Seeing things come together.
Every other field does it.
Yeah.
The health field does it. We all bring ourselves together collectively so that we can learn from one another. And until recently, of course, it's been around for centuries. But until recently, now it's okay to start to integrate, if we move beyond stigma, the practices of theology and the principles of psychology, or vice versa, which is my tagline. Commish speaks, integrating theological practices, principles with psychological practices. So it's just now being upheld and embraced by many in the spiritual disciplines.
I wish the flip of that were true in the public university. That the public university would recognize the need for a chaplain, and that not just the students need chaplains, frankly, but the faculty need chaplains. Let me tell you, the faculty need chaplains, and it's huge. So I spend lots of time interacting with people over great, huge difficulties and questions. I spent 2 hours with somebody a couple of weeks ago. I locked for about 2 hours, and it ended up in tears, and they weren't mine. And the difficulties that everybody faces, no matter what field you're in, doesn't matter, whatever vocation you're in. Commission Unley is somebody that you need to know about and make sure that you contact for everything, all of the services that she can provide. Just before we go, and we just have a couple minutes here to kind of wrap this up, why don't you tell people, maybe in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, whatever, however you want to kind of close this out, let people know what it is in a nutshell doing, and then how they can be benefited by it.
Absolutely. One of the things that I'll leave is understanding a significant quote that I sort of base my practice on is, there's beauty in the understanding that as human beings, we all experience some level of pain. And there's always an equal measure of pain and pleasure, good and bad. And what's important is that we embrace in those moments the lessons that it has to teach us, instead of dwelling on the fact that we're in the painful situation. And when we find ourselves in those painful situations or experiencing those negative events, careful not to isolate yourself and set yourself apart, because that leaves room for the enemy of sorts to attack and get you on his playing ground, versus reaching out for our services, which is that of counseling, coaching, spiritual advocacy, getting surrounded with a group of peers who are experiencing some of the same things, so that we can help you come out of the darkness. There is no shame in vulnerability. In fact, it's the opposite that is true. Vulnerability is just a gateway to our greatest strengths. So if we're not willing to shed light in the dark areas, how can we expect God to work through people? Because that's how, he sends his help. He works through people in order to reach out to help you. And so some of the things that I'm doing is I'm traveling, providing telehealth therapy, virtual therapy, and doing educational seminars surrounding this topic. And of course, working on the book, meeting with pastors, meeting with churches that are interested in bringing our company in to, set up a mental health ministry. And just all in all, letting people know that transparency is okay. If you haven't gotten to a point where you are emotionally healthy, that's okay too, because there has to be a starting point. So just giving people a safe place to go further in and deeper about anything that they're experiencing in a safe, non-judgmental way is helpful. And it's something that I enjoy experiencing with different sergeant members.
Great.
So.
One more time, the website?
HealingYourHiddenHurts.com or HealingHiddenHurtsMinistries.org.
There you go.
Yes.
Or you can look up Commissioner Nunley on Facebook, social media. She's there. You'll notice all kinds of different folks that are invested in these kinds of things that she's ministered in their lives too. Thanks so much for joining us here today. We're grateful to be with you. For Harold H.B. Bell, the producer and owner of Radio Next. And we're also grateful for Josh Collingwood and his good work and the digitization that he does behind the scenes. HB loves it when I say that word. All of that stuff. He takes care of our websites. We're grateful. And we're going to take off next week. I actually have a week where I need to spend some time with other ministry leaders here in Indianapolis. So no broadcast next week, but we will be back in March. And we're going to kick it off Women's History Month in March. And we are going to have somebody on the show that everybody needs to know more about. And she's a leader herself, and it's going to be great to have her on. Looking forward to the opportunity to do some more work here in and around Indianapolis. Until that time, you've been listening to Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We'll see you on March 5th. Thanks for being with us.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
That was good.
Do you
My
know
brain
about
woke up a little
the
bit.